Elliot Friedman dropped a huge note on the salary cap coming up this summer, and it has huge implications for the Montreal Canadiens, with a bunch of money coming off the books and a higher than expected likely jump in the salary cap. Montreal's in a prime position to do something big. We have to dive into all the implications for Montreal on that front. Plus, Jesse, a note on an interaction with Juraj Slafkovsky and the team last night that led to him being benched, with some very good things coming after. And finally, an article discussing how Lane Hutson maybe makes a certain trade even more likely for the Montreal Canadiens. Stick around for all of that on this episode of Habs Digest. But guys, before we get into the video, haven't done this in a while, we would love if every one of you watching this video who's not subscribed, that's over half, or about half of you, I should say, hit that button. It's completely free. You get notified of all our daily Montreal Canadiens news. If you want a home for all things Montreal Canadiens, this is the spot to be. Jesse, time to get into the video. Let's just jump first into this Lane Hutson thing. Now, this article is interesting. It'll be linked down below, written by Jim Parsons, NHL Trade Talk. Lane Hutson's play lets the Canadiens pull the trigger on a big trade. The way Hutson's playing for Montreal, the org should feel comfortable making a couple of big trades. Now, the big one that we talked about, or that he talked about in the article, is Mike Matheson. Naturally, it makes sense. So let's take a look at their stats. Well, they're very similar. Mike Matheson and Lane Hutson, the only difference, Matheson has one more goal, one more point. Hutson has a one better plus minus. Their time on ice, 23 minutes versus 24. Their, shots, Hutson doesn't take as many shots as Matheson. Of course, Matheson loves to do that in the power play. They're very similar players, Jesse. I will say it seems like Hutson's making fewer mistakes than Matheson this year, though Matheson has a bit of a bigger defensive role at the moment. Would you agree and say that Hutson's play has made Mike Matheson expendable to some extent?
I would agree with that. And the thing is I'm really hoping that Hughes just kind of doesn't get too attached, like too married to certain players, for lack of a better word, because we know that him and Mike Matheson have a relationship going back for a long time. We're talking about Christmas dinners, Thanksgiving dinners kind of together. And at the same time, I trust Hughes to still have those personal relationships with the players while also always doing what's best for this team at a certain point. It just comes across where it's like, we didn't know that Hutson would pan out to be the player that he has, but now that he has, you only got so many spots on your team for players that really kind of check those boxes. I think there's some things from Hutson's game that he kind of brings as well, those intangibles, which, does kind of phase out what Mike Matheson can do. Again, very good player in the NHL, but I just think Hutson is the future for this team. We will see this happen at a certain point in time, Josh. It's just more of a question is, when's the Lane trade going to roll into town on that PP1 to stay?
Yeah, we'll have to see. Like, Matheson's had some solid games recently, but every time he gets maybe a goal and an assist like last game, there was a couple bad turnovers here and there. It's a bit interesting to watch this team develop. It's interesting to see the differences in Hutson and Matheson, but I'd love to hear a lot of your guys' thoughts down below. Would you say that Hutson's play has made Matheson a likely trade candidate? Because honestly, I think Montreal could get a pretty penny for him if they sold him to the right buyer. We'll just have to wait and see. But Jesse, I want to move on to the next subject. Now, this was from an article from Arber Basu that I will link down below. I tweeted it out earlier as well because I think it's a fantastic read for everyone that wants to see some inner machinations of what goes on in Marty's mind and in the team's mind. So there was a point last night, of course, where Slafkovsky, he got benched for a bit. And basically what happens is Slaf got the puck. It was near the end of a shift for Evans. Evans couldn't get off the ice. Suzuki couldn't get on. So it was Slaf and Dach with Evans for a bit, but Evans was tired. Slaf, instead of just chipping the puck down the ice, he tried to pass it back to the middle to the tired Evans. It was intercepted. Evans took another 30 seconds to get off the ice. And then once he finally did, Montreal was put in a tough spot. Slaf, well, he was benched after that. Suzuki didn't like it. I talked to him. I didn't love it. You can't just get dejected because Slaf went back to the bench and he was pouting, right? He slammed his stick. You could probably hear a certain word he said on the broadcast, right? No one likes getting benched, or it's how you respond after. But Suzuki said Slaf did respond well. And that's the big thing, Jesse. And Martin St. Louis said, you know what? We taught him a lesson. We saw Slaf on the fourth line after that. He was benched for a bit, sent out with the fourth line as Armia took his spot on the top line. Armia even got an assist to Suzuki during that time. But as the game went on, Slaf started to pick his pace up. He started to play really strong, and at the end of the game, as Arpin said, he was one of the happiest players. What do you think this has to say about Martin St. Louis and how this team is being coached a little bit different this year? Because this is something we might not have seen in the last year or two.
I think it speaks volume on Martin St. Louis and what we really want from him as a coach. And again, there was a couple of things as a team, not only for Martin St. Louis to kind of have that tough love to kind of bench him, but then Nick Suzuki to have that great leadership at the end of the second period to go and speak to them. Again, it's not just the accountability from the coach down, but, Marty's always saying that he wants those players to kind of hold each other accountable a little bit more. And I think it's so great that Nick Suzuki's saying, you know what, like, you can't get so frustrated like that. You got to get back in the game, and everything else, back in that present moment, got to let it go at a certain point and kind of brush it off and move forward. And the fact that, like, Juraj Slafkovsky again was then able to, so again, there's the coaching, there's the leadership, but then Slav actually responding in that third period, getting back to that, a little bit more of that simple game, which for me was just so important to really stick to a game plan. And again, show respect to your coach by knowing what the game plan is and really executing that. And Josh, like, I know this is a big one because you brought up like a great point in the past where we've been talking about, like, we love Martin St. Louis, but a big thing we were always just wondering is, like, as we get further into the rebuild, like, will he start holding players a little bit more accountable and everything? Because we have seen, like, some bad tales in the NHL, like not far away, just down the 417 over in Ottawa with DJ Smith, where it's like, good coach, likable guy, but he could never, it was kind of that friend relationship, always signed with the players. He couldn't really hold them accountable. And that's what maybe kind of held back Ottawa's rebuild. We know it was kind of a very obvious thing for this team for quite a minute now. So the fact is we want Marty to succeed. And it's actually by having this tough love approach at certain points and having your players respond that is absolutely so huge for everybody in this organization going forward.
And it's not just the coaches, like you said, it's teammates too, right? If the teammates are back and the coach back in that kind of thing, back in that tough love, even Evan said after the game, he said, we needed that. He said, Marty's teaching us now like we're growing up. And the one thing I will say about Marty is he doesn't have a lot of experience as a coach, but we're seeing that growth with him, which is why we've been very much saying be patient, see what happens. He has to adjust just as well as a new player in the NHL would have to adjust. You can't come in as a brand new coach who's never coached at this level and expect to nail everything. So absolutely, I think it's great to see that these kind of things are starting to happen for Montreal and they're starting to work out. Maybe in a more rough game, you might see more complaints and stuff, but right now I think it's really, really good. Let us know what you think about that. It was a great article and your thoughts on the whole Slafkovsky situation down below, as we're going to move into our final topic, and this is one that I find very interesting, Jesse. So Friedman's been dropping bombs left and right recently. Do I still have that? Oh yeah, dang, of course I do. We got the F-bomb ready to go. Here we go. Let's jump into what he had to say. So on Saturday night, that game, Saturday night, second intermission, we mentioned the Don Waddell thing with David Juraj last night, but the other thing that Friedman said, he talked about the salary cap, but there are talks that it might go even higher than that $92.5 million figure, and I'm going to get into what he said. So what he said there's going to be a CBA negotiation next year, and one of the things they're going to be talking about is the salary cap. He said league revenues have been strong. They've actually outpaced the guardrails on that salary cap of $92.5 million that was set during COVID. It was a conservative estimate because they didn't know where the league was going to go. And he follows it up with this. He said there's two paths to follow. One, they keep the salary cap next year at 92.5, and there's a huge jump after in 26-27, or what the players say they've kind of been told about is the possibility that the cap moves higher next year, probably around the $95 or $97 million area. Now, we don't know as of right now which one of those two paths is going to happen, but Jesse, with Montreal having about $18 million coming off the books next season in terms of the salary retention, plus people who are now going to be unrestricted free agents. Now, to be fair, I think like 10 million, 12 million of that goes into Slaf and Guhle's extensions next year, but still, that still leaves you with like $6-7-ish million freed up for next year, and you see the salary cap that has the potential to jump by up to, so right now it's at 88, it could jump up to almost $10 million more. Montreal's been put in an incredible position to go after some big names this year, Jesse. I think this is exactly what Hughes and Gorton were saying when they were planning for a big summer in 2025.
And this is where things get really fun and exciting kind of going forward. We're getting close to that time because we know that once we kind of get a lot of those big contracts off the book, with Dvorak, Armia, etc. Obviously, this is where Kent Hughes is really going to get the chance to execute his vision for the team, and we can really kind of judge him on his merit of what sort of players he's bringing on. So absolutely, that is going to be huge going forward with this team. What I will say is an important thing for this team going forward is that, like players like Rantanen, players like, Ehlers is maybe on the list. Like Rantanen's going to be hard to get. We often see at teams at this point in their rebuild, they often, it's about drafting, developing everything, but then you sort of see the trades before the big free agency swings. We saw a little bit of that with Patrick Laine. That was a sign that we're now, okay, we've done the drafting development. Now we're doing trades to kind of add to that young core that we've built. So that free agency normally kind of comes as like the coup de grace kind of like at the end. So I don't know if that's going to happen like quite as soon as this summer here, just based off the names. But I expect to see some big trades first, kind of coming forward for the Habs. But of course, having this financial flexibility, of course, it is going to be super beneficial and key for this team moving forward.
It's going to be so interesting to see what happens because, yeah, Montreal just has all the room in the world to play with. Now, we've been kind of hesitant on free agent signings here because, even like Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon have said, like those kind of signings, a lot of the time you're paying a guy who's pretty old for a lot of money, and that can mess up your timeline as well. Look, yeah. I'm sure Nashville could bounce back. Of course, they've got some wins, but they're struggling this year, and they were the biggest winner of the offseason with all their free agency signings, right, with older players. But if you're a team like Montreal, you still have a big young core. You're not putting all of your top scoring into free agents. There's some names on this list, Jesse, of free agents coming up this next year. We've talked about Marner before. Like him or hate him, he's a good player. We'll see. Rantanen, again, going to cost a bunch of money. He'll probably end up getting an extension, something like that. Ehlers, we said. Marchand, no chance. But there's a name here that I find interesting, and I want to get your thoughts before we clue up the video. That's Aaron Ekblad. Now, Aaron Ekblad, former first overall pick, he has some mileage on his body, right? He's been injury prone. He was a former 15-goal scorer multiple times. He's always been in that 10 to 20 goal range in his whole career. He's been a bit hurt recently though. He played the full Stanley Cup run last year. But, he's coming up to the end of his contract. Panthers fans are not sure if they want to extend him or if they want to let him go to free agency because he'll probably fetch $7 to $8 million over a longer term. He's 6'4". He's a right-hand shot defenseman. He's a veteran. In theory, Jesse, he's the kind of guy that is exactly what Montreal needs. But again, with an injury-prone guy, you'd have to bid a lot for him. But maybe something like that, maybe not him, but someone else like him if they're available in free agency. Do you think Montreal might go for a Savard replacement that's maybe a little bit younger and a little bit higher caliber?
Depending on the term, I'm not going to lie, it's kind of enticing in certain ways. We know the injury issues there, but if you're looking at the context of what you're paying for Devo and Armia right now, that's kind of that $7 million that you'd probably be expecting from Ekblad kind of going forward there. Again, on the right-hand side, having that vet presence, that's two big checkbox, more of a defensive guy for the most part as well. Good in the playoffs. He does for sure, but that's a big thing. It's he kind of fits a couple of those check boxes while still being able to hold his own defensively, which I think is the big thing of who we're looking to bring in on defense is so key. We got a couple guys that we know can hold down the fort offensively, which it's a beautiful issue to have. So it's all about kind of rounding it off from there. It's an interesting player. Of course, with free agency, there's always that risk, that they're going to want the term and everything else, but you're going to have a little bit more money to spend. So out of all the names there, it is one of the more interesting ones. I wouldn't say I'm completely sold as it being a perfect fit, but for sure, being a vet on that right-hand side, that's tantalizing in a couple ways.
Well, the biggest thing is anything could happen, right? Like you said, there could be a lot of trades before deadline. There could be a lot of trades before free agency even opens. We don't know what's going to happen. And the fact that these names are out there and could even be mentioned in the same sentence as the Montreal Canadiens is what the interesting part. There'll be more names that are going to be talked about, whether in a trade, whether in free agency, maybe not big names like that. Maybe someone a little bit smaller that'll fill a more niche need, right? Who knows? But what we do know is Kent's about to be cooking. Coming up this summer, there's going to be some great things coming. I want to hear your thoughts down below on all this wonderful stuff, because that'll do it for this episode of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel like you always do. We really appreciate all the support. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.